This is Ronald James Reed, and this is the story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about success and wealth. At his time of death in 2014, Ronald's net worth was over $8 million. Now I want you to take a guess in the comments down below. What job do you think he had? Was he a tech mogul, a corporate executive, a surgeon, lawyer, dentist? I bet you're not gonna get it. Ronald was a janitor from rural Vermont. In fact, he was the first in his family to graduate from high school. He fixed cars at a gas station for 25 years and swept floors as, again, a janitor at JCPenney for 17 years. And he couldn't even afford a place to live until he bought a small 2-bedroom house for just $12,000 at the age of 38. And for those who knew Ronald, there wasn't much else worth mentioning. His life was about as low-key as they get. He was widowed at age 50 and he never remarried. A friend once recalled that his main hobby was chopping firewood. This sounds like a pretty boring guy, to be honest, but in 2014, he died and he made absolutely international headlines. Listen to this part carefully. 2,813,503 Americans died in the year 2014. Of those 2.8 million, only 4,000 of them had a net worth over $8 million when they passed away. That's 0.1%. And guess what? Ronald Reed was one of those people. In his will, the former janitor left $2 million to his stepkids and more than $6 million to his local hospital and library. The people in Ronald's life were all baffled. Where did he get all that money from? His stepson said that he was a hard worker, but he didn't think that anyone had any clue that he was a multi-millionaire. Well, he must have had some secret inheritance or some lottery money, but no, there was no secrets. There was no unforeseen money that he came upon. Ronald saved what little that he could and invested it in blue chip stocks. Then he waited for decades on end as his tiny little savings account compounded into more than $8 million. It sounds crazy, but that's it. Ronald really went from a gas station attendant and a janitor to a philanthropist who donated a whopping $6 million to his local community. He didn't chase quick riches, he played the long game. So we obviously need to take a look at Ronald's strategy and how he did this. We know he doesn't have a high income. In fact, if we look at the average wage when Ronald started working, we can estimate that he made somewhere around $1.20 per hour. That's it. Only $1.20. By the time he retired, he may have been making somewhere around $12 an hour, but still, this is not even minimum wage these days. The way that Ronald got so wealthy while earning next to nothing from his jobs can be broken down into 3 main steps. Step number 1, he lived within his means. Step number 2, he saved diligently. And step number 3, he understood the power of compound interest. Let's break this down a little bit further. Ronald lived frugally, well below his means actually. He drove an old, cheap Toyota Yaris as his car, and he kept his old coat together with safety pins. He didn't dine out frequently except for inexpensive breakfasts at his local hospital's cafe. In one article, we find out that he looked so down on his luck rather than wealthy that one neighbor even knit him a hat and another one paid for his meals sometimes. When visiting anyone like his lawyer, it's reported that he would park fairly far away and take a longer walk than necessary just to avoid having to put change in a parking meter. His recreation wasn't costly either. Instead of paying for golf courses or travel, he enjoyed chopping wood, which also saved him some money for heating his house. He avoided buying books and instead went to the local library. It's safe to say that Ronald lived well below his means, a very, very frugal life, but you don't necessarily have to live as far below your means as he did. You can simply be frugal and more conscious of what you're spending, and in the process, you can still build meaningful wealth. But if you do choose to employ some extreme frugality like Mr. Ronnie here, you can grow your money even quicker and more powerfully. The second thing that Ronnie did really well was he invested consistently and diligently. He would read new books and news from the Wall Street Journal regularly that kept him up to date on the companies that he was investing in. He consistently saved and invested a chunk of his monthly income throughout the decades that he was employed. And the third and potentially the most groundbreaking or magical part of this whole story is the compound interest that led this janitor from minimum wage all the way up to retiring with $8 million, which is more than 99.9% of other people that passed away that year. Ronald's strategy is extra powerful because of his choice in investments. Instead of focusing on things like gold or cash, bonds, or even real estate, Ronald bought just stocks. Historically, stocks have yielded the best annual returns over the last 100 years, and Ronald knew this. You can see here that stocks significantly outperform other traditional investments with over an average % annual return. And the best part about investing in stocks is it's not hard to do. You can do it, I can do it, literally anyone can invest in stocks. What specific stocks should we invest in though? Well, we look at Ronnie's portfolio here, and it featured many blue chip names such as Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan Chase, General Electric, AT&T, CVS Health, Bank of America, General Motors, Deere, and Johnson & Johnson. Now, one really important thing to note about all these choices in the stocks that he picked is not only are they obviously well known, but many of them pay dividends, meaning that these companies pay the shareholders of that stock on a regular basis in addition to the potential earnings from the growth of that company's stock value. So dividend stocks over the last century have actually outperformed regular stocks by an average of 10.4% annual growth versus the 8.5% that all other non-dividend stocks have returned. And that may sound like a small 1.9% difference, but it's actually huge when you're looking at the compound interest that has over several years. So for example, when Ronnie's portfolio was worth $2 million, somewhere around maybe age 55 or so, and his dividends were yielding 3.5% per year, he'd be collecting $70,000 from those holdings in a single year, which is almost likely more than, if not double or triple, what he was making at his job. But Ronnie didn't stop there. That money he redeployed into more shares of stock and earned even more interest on those dividends over the next several decades. So when the portfolio was worth $5 million and that same yield was 3.5%, he could actually earn $175,000 a year, all while doing the same janitor job he always had. Better still, that income would be on top of stock price appreciation, which means if those stocks went up over time, which they likely did, the dividends would be increased as well, and you can see just how powerful that means dividends really are. Let me give you an idea of what you or I could do right now to get on this level. Without doing anything special like picking a big winning lottery ticket, all you'd have to do is invest $500 per month for 50 years. And if the average annual growth is 8%, which again is pretty typical for the last century, hopefully it will be about the same moving forward, that would give you $3.5 million by the time, in my example, that I'm 78 years old. That's not bad for putting it into dividend paying investments and just letting it ride. But surely this is an anomaly, right? Well, a few months before Ronald Read died, another man named Richard was in the news. Richard Fuscone was everything that Ronald Read was not. Richard was a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with an MBA. This guy was a big deal. He had a successful career in finance. He was so successful, in fact, that his career in finance allowed him to retire in his 40s to become a philanthropist as well, just like Ronald. At the time, the CEO of the fourth largest brokerage firm in the world praised Richard for his business savvy, leadership skills, sound judgment, and personal integrity. Business Magazine even included him in a 40 under 40 list of successful business people. So safe to say, again, Fuscone was a top dog early in his career, but then everything fell apart. In the mid-2000s, Richard borrowed heavily to expand his 18,000 square foot home in Connecticut that had 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 pools, 7 garages, and cost more than $90,000 per month just to maintain it. Overly extravagant, you might say. Then in 2008, the financial crisis hit. The crisis hurt virtually everyone's finances. It apparently turned Richards into dust. High debt and illiquid assets left him bankrupt. What's the moral of the story here? Ronald was patient and lived well within his means, while Richard was greedy and overly extravagant. And that's all it took to eclipse the massive education and experience gap between these two people. The real lesson here is actually not to be more like Ronald and less like Richard. The lesson here is that patience, consistency in saving and investing, and time are more than enough to overcome what you may lack in skill, talent, intelligence, or even overall potential. Work hard every day in whatever it is that you do, even if you're a janitor or work at a gas station. If you love what you do, that's most important. And then take your earnings, save a portion every week, every month, or every year, and invest it in the stock market. Watch compound interest and time. That's it. Work wonders for your financial situation no matter who you are or what you do. In what industry does someone with no college degree, no training, no background, no formal experience, and no connections massively outperform someone with the best education, the best training, and the best connection? The answer is simple: none of them. Ronald is a real-life living example that even someone who earns minimum wage but makes consistent investments over time can financially outperform even the most savvy individuals.